And I think that's a good segue into what I'd like to talk about next, which is, well, okay, what can be done? And I don't think this needs to be a huge problem if people can attack it in the right way. So I might stay with you there, Erica. What
Mhm.
advice would you give to organizations who are grappling with the best approach to creating a culture of psychological safety?
Look, for me, curiosity is one of the best leaders in. If we can create a culture whereby we are curious by nature, that opens us up to a whole host of different behaviors. We are not going up that assumptions ladder and, thinking that we understand things when we don't. It opens us up to innovation, to trialing different things. I'm also a big believer that we need to demonstrate care with performance. And care is all the things about, I need to care about you as a person, but it also looks like I need to provide you with feedback as and when required, because they're both behaviors that demonstrate care, and they end up being, driving performance in the right way. Post COVID, we started to see that levels of emotional professionalism waned, and we were seeing quite interesting, and I'd love Steve's thoughts on this, behaviors at work where we regressed a little bit. So it's really about educating what is emotional professionalism at work, what is okay and what is not okay, and what does bringing oneself to work actually look like, because there is a degree of professionalism that we do need to adhere to. And as I mentioned earlier, I honestly believe that we need to support our people leaders more than we ever have before. Hybrid, post COVID, emotional professionalism, all these types of things have put a whole lot more emphasis and a degree of stress on people. So I think the focus needs to be on supporting them a whole lot.
Thank you, Erica. Steve, did you want to jump in there?
Well, it's an interesting question. Have we seen more of these issues arise post COVID? I think there's been an interesting issue in terms of the increase in remote working. And this is, I don't have data to back me up on this, but I mean, the position really is we're all imperfect. And certainly in my interactions, and I deal with a lot of allegations of workplace bullying and misconduct and so forth. And in fact, universally, I've never had someone make an allegation that didn't genuinely believe they'd been treated unfairly. And almost universally, I can say that the person who's alleged to have bullied them didn't intend to do anything mean or nasty. They didn't mean to upset the other person. Most people are going to work trying to do their best and genuinely doing the best they can, bearing in mind that, everyone's going to work with other pressures, whether it's I'm worried about interest rates rising and I can't pay my mortgage. I've recently had a illness in the family. All these things are really significant stresses, and everyone's doing their best, is my general view of what people are trying to do at work. And perhaps there was a greater sense of when we're all working in the same office, we knew a bit more about the fact that, look, Steve's having a tough time at the moment. His kid's unwell. He's not at his best. You've got to cut him a bit of slack. And maybe when we're all a bit more removed from each other at home, we don't have that sense that, look, we've got to give an allowance to everyone for what else is going on in their lives. So, yeah, I think that there has been a bit of that post-COVID, that we're perhaps not as tolerant of each other's imperfections. I sort of sense that, but I don't have data to back that up. But certainly that's my sense. And I do feel there's a lot to be done in workplace about saying, look, generally everyone's coming here with good intent. And we really need to start the discussion by assuming good intent when we interact with other people at work.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point, Steve. I think it also reminds me of why it's so important to ask a question and properly listen. And there's a few different ways you can do that. And of course, we love to help our clients to do that, to actively ask and to listen and measure and then drive through insights and improvement as a result. But that's not the only way. So, Michelle, I'm wondering, you work with a lot of emerging leaders. Do you think they've got the right capability in terms of maybe noticing if maybe there's something wrong with one of their people? Is there a capability gap there, or actually is this new generation of leaders coming through a bit more in tune with how their people are feeling?
It's such an interesting question, because I think what I'm seeing with emerging leaders is the same as what I've seen with leaders of the past. Some people come with an innate sense of emotional intelligence that enables them to do this, and some people don't, and they actually need to learn it. At the Growth Collective, we have a framework for the fundamentals of leadership, and they've never been more important. And that starts with a bit of self-awareness. And the build on that is that then you need to be able to set context, hold people to account, give them feedback, and develop them to close those gaps. So if our leaders are building those capabilities as a foundation, and I call them a foundation, knowing full well that very experienced leaders are still not flexing their muscles around that and still need to build that capability. Because, Erika mentioned it before, our leaders are at risk. And if they can't demonstrate the self-awareness to know what's going on for them, they can't then take the next step and be aware of the impact they're then having on others. And that's a big key to getting this right. And if they then can't have the conversation that helps set expectations and give feedback in the moment, and that's a two-way flow with what Steve mentioned around clarity intent, we're going to continue to face into real challenges. So I really feel like leader capability is becoming so critical in getting this right. And I think leaders coming up today, if we invest now in them, they're more likely to get ahead. But I'm not necessarily seeing a really big gap in leaders of tomorrow versus the leaders of the past. It is something that some people come with and can build on it, or they have to work really hard at building that capability. But it can be built.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I'm sorry, if I may, just further to that. So what we're seeing, and there's actually data points on this, organisations tend to invest in their leaders once they're senior. The rub is that your behaviours are ingrained at that point. So you're better off investing when they're emerging so they can develop and flex the muscles necessary. But we always intervene too late. And this is where I think we need to start thinking differently. Do you agree, Michelle?
Absolutely. It's when in all the work that I do, I tend to get a lot of leaders, the request for leadership development is always for the sexiest stuff. Let's talk adaptive. Let's talk about this for our senior leaders. And then I work with them and I'm like, oh, there's some real foundations missing. And all the coaching that I do with executives, we are leaning into the concept of self-awareness, their hang-ups about giving feedback. A lot of leaders, even now, more now than ever, they're feeling a lot of fear about leaning into their role of leadership out of fear for getting it wrong. And I think these changes are actually adding to that when they're not feeling like they've got the capability to equip it. And then when I get companies come to me about training, the foundations they want to reserve for their emerging leaders. And I say, let's get these foundations right for the senior leaders, because to Erika's point, sometimes those behaviours become quite ingrained, and it takes a lot of coaching and work with an individual to help them actually change that behaviour set that they've built up over many years.
Thank you. So it sounds to me that we are saying that if we get the right OHS frameworks right, and that they consider psychosocial hazards in the workplace, that if we measure what our employees are thinking and feeling, if we have leaders with the right capability to also observe where there may be challenges, to push into problems, to ask questions, then hopefully we don't have too much to worry about. But of course, we always understand that life's different. So there will be issues that come up. So Steve, I'm wondering from your perspective, if there's a leadership team out there or even a senior leader who's concerned, maybe they're receiving feedback or maybe they've just got other concerns, what should they do?
Well, I think you've got to be, the change we're really saying is you have to be proactive, not reactive. And I think it comes down, I mean, Erika mentioned before, curiosity is a great word, I think. If you're hearing things or if you're not hearing anything, you need to try to understand what is happening, how are people feeling. If they're not feeling great, why is that? What can you do about it? And it can be very simple stuff. So an example my colleague Bridget often gives is an example that happened in the medical field. And they were talking about the fact that people in an operating theatre feel very intimidated. they won't articulate it, but they feel very intimidated by the surgeons in the theatre. And they say quite often when a mistake happens, someone else in the theatre realised that something was going wrong but didn't speak up because they said, well, the surgeon's in charge of the surgery, I don't want to speak up. And they, she gives the example, they instituted at one place a policy of before the operation starts, you spend 2 minutes going through saying everyone in the theatre explains who they are, what their name is and what their role is. And they said just simply acknowledging that people were there and had a role there made people much more prepared to say, look, this is going wrong. And often people will, realise that something's going wrong before the surgeon does, because the surgeon's focused elsewhere when the problem first emerges. And obviously the first time you raise it, the sooner you raise the issue, the more likely it is it can be addressed. And Bridget's example is, look, there are tremendous results from this very simple process. So I guess part of the message from my perspective is some of this stuff I think is really difficult and nuanced and so forth. But some of the strategies you can use if you're concerned are actually quite simple things, can be quite powerful, I think is what that stands for. I've got a question I'd love to ask, and it's about Ange Postecoglou. Because I've been very interested in his approach this year. So Ange Postecoglou is an Australian coach who's recently become the coach of one of the large English clubs at Tottenham. And he's spoken a lot about how he interacts with players. And he's interesting because he's been quite specific about the fact that he doesn't form a close bond with players on a personal level. And he says, look, my role is to be clear about what the expectation is for players and to give them clear feedback about when they do and don't meet those expectations, and to set really high standards and hold players to account for those standards. But if they've got sort of issues in their personal life, I'm not equipped to discuss those issues. And we've got people at the club who do that, who are professional psychologists. So I ask the player to speak to the psychologist. I don't have those discussions. So it's been quite an interesting hearing him say that, because I think it sort of is against the trend we've seen of coaches really becoming close to players. I'm interested if people have got a view about that generally and how it applies in the workplace, and whether maybe we're expecting too much of managers to be confidants of their staff as well as managers.
I agree. I don't think you need to develop a personal relationship with someone to demonstrate care. And it sounds like he's doing just that in his leadership style and approach. He's being clear. He's giving them the feedback they need. He's holding them to account. They're not going to be second guessing where they need to be. But the most important thing that he's doing there is he's leveraging the resources that are relevant to support them where they can. It's actually, I genuinely believe it is not a leader's job to be an individual's counsellor. They're not equipped with it. They're not skilled at it. But if you're a leader, you need to know what the support resources are, and you need to make sure that your people know how to access them. So I wholeheartedly agree with that style of leadership. Some leaders do like to develop a close relationship, and I think if that's their style of leadership, that's great. But I don't think it's necessary to be a great leader. I think what makes a great leader is all those things that Steve just articulated around. He's very clear about what they need to accomplish. He lets them know the intent. He holds them to account. He gives them the great feedback, and he keeps them moving forward. And then he gets them access to the resources they need when they need it. And that is a demonstration of good leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. Erika?
I completely concur with Michelle. Care does not equal I need to be your friend. Care can be many, many different things in the workplace. For me, care is about you as a leader can demonstrate an affinity. You can relate to the person that reports into you. But care at work really looks like I support you when you need support. I provide you with feedback. I connect you with all the growth and development opportunities there are. And if there is something that I am not equipped to do, I will link you to that. To me, that's what defines care in a workplace. It doesn't mean that we go out for drinks. If you do that, that's great, but that does not necessarily mean that that's care in the workplace. So I completely agree.